Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the many lands across Australia and beyond today, for which we are all joining. So I pay my respects to elders past and present, and I extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples that may be joining us or watching the recording later. So recognise their enduring connection to country and culture and community, and really their vital role that takes place in learning and knowledge sharing. We'd just like to run through a very quick housekeeping rules. So we do ask while the presentation is on that we keep ourselves on mute. Of course, unless you're speaking or presenting, and that's really to avoid the background noise. Please use the chat to share your reflections and comments, perhaps put in the chat which lands you're joining us from today, that's relevant to you. There will be plenty of time for discussions and questions and conversation. So we ask you to hold on to those until after the presentation. Again, use the chat, it will be monitored. As Rhiannon's noted, today's session is being recorded for the presentation only and will be stopped for that conversation part and discussions. If you have any technical issues, use the chat and we'll try to troubleshoot. So once again, thanks for joining us all today, and to open our program, I'd like to hand over to Leonie.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's PASCAL's Connecting Urban and Rural Learning Initiatives online forum, the Civic thread, weaving urban and rural knowledge in a learning society. I'm Dr. Leonie Wheeler, and I'm the Honorary CEO of the Australian Learning Communities Network and coordinator of the PASCAL International Observatory's Connecting Urban and Rural Learning Initiatives, which is part of PASCAL's Learning City Network special interest groups, and I'm delighted to be your MC today. The PASCAL Learning Cities Network, Connecting Urban and Rural Learning Initiatives, is an informal network and examines the distinctive learning needs of rural and remote communities to find ways in which learning city initiatives and linkages to urban communities can support learning development and sustainable community building that addresses the particularity of smaller places. The UN says that 55% of the world's population lives in urban areas, and it's expected to increase by 68% by 2030. Sustainable urbanisation is the key. But what is this, and how can we have integrated policies to improve the lives of both urban and rural dwellers? As someone who is passionate about lifelong learning and the inclusion of rural communities into a learning city framework, I'm excited and honoured to have Dr. Rhiannon Jones speak about how urban and rural communities can share and integrate their unique forms of knowledge within a broader, collaborative and evolving learning society. Rhiannon Jones is an Associate Professor and Head of Civic and Community at the University of Derby. She heads the Civic Lab, an institution-wide centre, participatory culture, creative dialogue and civic practice, and leads the curation and delivery of the Civic flagship program. And her CV is quite long, and so I'll put the rest of it in the chat.
Thank you so much, and good morning and good evening to everybody. I really appreciate that you're all here and giving up your time to join the session, and I want to thank Dr. Wheeler and the PASCAL Learning Cities Network, PASCAL International Observatory and the Australian Learning Communities Network for the opportunity to speak with you all. So the plan, as you've heard, is that I'll talk for about 20 minutes and open up for discussion and reflections. It is slide free, which means that my colleague Callum Bate, who's joining me from the University of Derby, is kind of going to be using the chat function, where we'll be posting links, capturing any questions, and also posing some provocations for our discussion later. So before I dive in, I want to share a little context about the position from which I'm speaking to you all and why that matters. I speak to you as a civic practitioner and a researcher, rooted in the city of Derby, which is part of the UK UNESCO Learning City network and is a UNESCO Learning City. A place with rich industrial heritage and a growing culture of civic innovation. And my work is grounded in public realm engagement, social mobility, and creative practice. And it's shaped by the belief that communities are the experts in their own lives, and that meaningful change begins when we listen, when we collaborate, and when we co-create. Derby is a living example of how urban and rural knowledge can be woven together. It's a city surrounded by countryside, connected by civic ambition, and alive with possibility. So as we explore the idea of the civic thread, I invite you to consider not just the theory, but the lived experience of place, of people, and of practice. I speak to you today not just as an academic, but as a civic practitioner, someone who designs and delivers programs to drive social mobility and shape public space. My work is rooted in the belief that communities, as I said, are the experts, and so we must build systems that allow people to be seen, heard, empowered, and lead change. Developing communities of practice and communities of influence that respond to real need in real time in place. So for me, placemaking as a learning city isn't about imposing ideas. It's about listening, responding, and reshaping spaces and the built environment to serve people in the most meaningful way. That strategic leadership that then is required has to be driven by a cultural, behavioural, and moral commitment to civic life. So I often act as a connector and an enabler, fostering partnerships that bridge between universities, local authorities, businesses, third sectors, and the wider community. My mission is clear: to be a catalyst for social change in a learning city. Through that innovative engagement, I aim to create, nurture, and progress initiatives that improve health and well-being, address local change, and build a more equitable society, one thread at a time. So I work at the University of Derby, which is in the UK, and I'm very fortunate to be the head of Civic and Community alongside brilliant teammates and stakeholders. Together we share ideas and hope to develop best practice by facilitating these meaningful added value relationships. We power both the community and the university to enable them to feel they can contribute and they can have autonomy to lead on programs in our learning city. We take a holistic approach often, which is an integral part to enabling people to feel they can meet their personal, their workplace, and the university's shared civic goals. So let's zoom out a little bit now. Derby, where is it? Well, it's Middle England. Derby is located in the sort of near the geographical centre of England. It sits in the East Midlands region, making it a natural meeting point between northern and southern England, between urban and rural landscapes. And this central location has historically made Derby a hub for transport, trade, and innovation, especially during the Industrial Revolution. And today it continues to serve as a strategic connector, strong rail and road links, and a civic culture that bridges diverse communities and knowledge systems. It's got a huge and complex history with heritage and its growing diversity and population, which is rapidly increasing. It's home to a mix of vibrant communities and ethnically diverse groups. And this multicultural fabric enriches the city's civic life, contributing to the dynamic cultural and learning landscape. Derby is internationally recognised as part of the UNESCO Global Network of Learning Cities in the UK, which was awarded that status in 2022 for its commitment to lifelong learning, civic engagement, and sustainable development. We have a unique blend of that industrial legacy, and that makes it quite compelling for us to then talk with other cities about how we can think about modern day enlightenment, what the fourth industrial revolution is, and how we can think about inclusive learning cities when we have such a vibrant and diverse city for learning ourselves. So rather than thinking now about fixed definitions, I'm going to start to open this talk up as a space for inquiry. So I'm asking you, please, to come with me now on this next part of the talk. Now you know a little bit more about me, about Derby, and let's discover some new interwoven connections between all of us here today as an online community. I invite you to reflect with me on how urban and rural knowledge might be threaded into that shared civic fabric, and how learning rooted in place, in practice, and in people can shape a more inclusive and responsive world. So let's make a start. What is a civic thread? Well, I put it in my title, so hopefully I might know. I would propose that a civic thread is a metaphorical concept that describes the connective elements between relationships, practices, and shared values. And by weaving communities together through a civic context or project, we can then think about how civic life is not fixed, but a dynamic tapestry made up of very many interlaced strands, local knowledges, cultural expansion, public dialogue, and collaborative action. So within that context then, I'm thinking about Derby as a fairly new learning city and a city of sanctuary. Civic thread for me represents the interweaving of urban and rural knowledge, the invisible yet powerful connections between people and place, and provides a framework for co-creation, so diverse voices can be stitched together to form inclusive, resilient communities. Yes, I appreciate that's a very poetic way of describing how a civic identity might be formed. But it's really important to then ground that in a strategy and in clear goals, of which we have developed 5 through public consultation, which allowed the city and the county, our urban and rural landscapes, to have agreed what the priorities are for us as a people and place. I wanted to then reflect a little bit further on this metaphor and the idea of the urban and rural knowledge systems that we can create in a place. So in Derby, I've mentioned we've got a very significant history of weaving and textile production, particularly in the silk industry, which played a foundational role in the city's industrial development. Derby Silk Mill is located near the River Derwent and is widely regarded as the world's first fully mechanised factory. It was built in the early 18th century and famously brought silk throwing technology from Italy through industrial espionage, and the mill marked the beginning of large-scale silk thread manufacturing and laid the groundwork for the Industrial Revolution. So thinking about that and how it is and was a place of making and for learning, and as a university, we are the only university that serves city and county, urban and rural landscapes, geographies, ecologies, communities, and we are teaching on the Teaching Excellence Framework in the UK. We are ranked as gold. So we're really thinking about that new standard for what it means to be a UNESCO City of Lifelong Learning, as an applied university, as a civic university in the 21st century. But all of this can only be achieved through partnership working. And in order to be a learning city, we have to understand what we really mean and hold ourselves to account when we say we are a city of lifelong learning. So we need to make sure that within that context, we're very clear on how we engage with active citizenship. And by that, I mean, how does our work, our research, our teaching, how are we empowering people to participate meaningfully in their communities? How are we supporting them? What are we doing to drive social inclusion? How do we bridge the gaps between cultures, generations, and geographies? And how adaptable are we as a city to help individuals to identify what they want to maybe air, to discuss, what the problems are? How do we bridge the gap between those for communities and with the policymakers and the people that have the power to make the changes for our cities? So I'm going to now take you through a first mini case study, which is to introduce you to the concept of S.H.E.D. So S.H.E.D stands for the Social Higher Education Depot. It's a mobile, flexible arts and public engagement space that was designed to foster dialogue, creativity, and support learning. So I created this to be both a physical structure and a conceptual framework for the shedding of preconceptions about people and place. It's flat pack, pop up. It can be transformed into different spaces. We have 36 configurations now, all co-designed with different partners to support learning, profile development, and to provide an inclusive and accessible space for communities often who don't have their voices heard. So we've supported over 700 creatives, 500 young people, showcased 50 new works, and had over 42,000 people in the shed just over 5 years. So S.H.E.D for me really embodies the idea of a civic thread by weaving together diverse voices, disciplines and geographies, creating a shared space for learning and transformation. And I hope it offers an example of how we can design dialogue to increase mobility and challenge the idea of where we learn and how we learn. So I'm going to just now talk about one particular project which really did operate across that urban and rural landscape, which was called Design for Planet. So that was a collaborative creative arts installation that was funded by the Design Council in the UK to take part with COP26. It was hosted at the V&A in Dundee, and the event celebrated design as a catalyst for climate action and social change. And I was invited to talk about how the S.H.E.D benefits communities and how it can engage young people with the urgent matters around climate change and crisis. We not only took the S.H.E.D and installed it at the V&A in Dundee, but while we were there, we said it was pertinent that we didn't talk the talk, but we walked the walk. So we worked with local communities in Dundee to demonstrate what we do in place. And that was a really powerful way of showing people what we do, of enacting what learning is, rather than just describing the act of learning and our methodology. We gathered the knowledge, we gathered the information that Dundee communities kindly shared with us while we were installed there. I fed that into my talk, and then we toured the S.H.E.D onwards to Timber Festival, which then was in partnership with the National Forest, and we were able to then take that thinking from the Design Council, from the strategy and policy conversations that I was fortunate enough to be involved in at COP26. We took that to a family festival of over 5,000 people in attendance, and we shared those conversations around a fire pit. We built miniature models of S.H.E.D. We carved into recycled pieces of the S.H.E.D, because we always upcycle and recycle our materials. Pledges to ourselves we carved, and they, from members of the public in that rural festival environment, were then positioned and exhibited alongside the pledges of global senior leaders in the design sector that were also making pledges to the planet and around what they were going to do to support the climate crisis. So that idea of touring and bringing audiences and bringing dialogue across places is absolutely important. And for us, it's thinking about, so what can urban areas learn from rural stewardship and vice versa? So those shared challenges that we had on that project were things about how do we take all of that learning from one another and then create or find to co-create solutions through that place-based learning and community-led knowledge production. And what became very apparent to us was that civic thread of weaving it, of showing it through material art forms became very, very powerful. That idea then of rural and urban connectivity, for us comes through how you connect with communities. And often it's about asking people to unlearn what they think they've learned, to reframe the question and to reclaim risk. So in this way, what does weaving knowledge require us in terms of unlearning? So we talk a lot about being a learning city, working at a university, a place of education. But actually, there's quite a lot of unlearning that needs to happen. Unlearning of dominant narratives so we can embrace risk and experimentation. So my thesis back in 2016, I defined a methodology which was entitled The Artistry of Conversation. And that takes the concept of conversation as a public art form and then says, well, how do we now create dialogue, in this case, between urban and rural communities through a creative act? So one example I've provided has been through the creative act of building and transforming a shed into different places and different spaces. But then if we think now about UNESCO Learning Cities as a tool for usefulness for cities and places, then we need to think about collaborative mapping of people and place. And that's really complex and tricky. And often it doesn't bring everybody into those mapped ecologies for place. And we need to recognize that and sometimes rewrite the map. What don't we know? Who aren't we engaging with? And how do we access what I call the local muscle memory of a place that often isn't acknowledged or valued, but is part of the rich tapestry of a place and the lived history that people who live, who work in the area carry? So stories is absolutely essential to threading together a civic learning city. My next case study to share with you about that connectivity of urban and rural is when S.H.E.D played a central role in public engagement of the Derbyshire's local nature recovery strategy, which was through a project entitled Shedding Light on Nature Recovery. So it was commissioned by a local authority, and we were supported to work across urban and rural spaces through designing alternative ways for creative engagement in city centres, in countryside locations, in local neighbourhoods, to try to spark curiosity between people with us on biodiversity, climate resilience, well-being, and then help the council to create an environmental strategy, which was published just 2 weeks ago. So again, I come back to this idea of finding the thread to connect places. And that's often through the dialogue, through the shared conversations that you have on a particular topic. But what's critical to all of that is that we have to understand that we are going to encounter the unexpected, the questions that maybe are slightly uncomfortable, but they're ones that we need to ask and support. So learning doesn't always need to be formalized, planned. It doesn't always need to be confined to an institution. For us, learning as a city, as a community, happens in parks, in markets, in museums, in mobile structures like the S.H.E.D. It bridges urban and rural contexts. And the project, we were able to, through our work, enact local strategy and policy change. So those two examples I've provided, the design for planet and the local nature recovery strategy, found a way of really supporting a relationship between urban and rural environments, landscapes, people, community. And we were able to think about that in terms of underpinning then our definition of a learning city. So what are the core principles and values of a learning city? Well, for us, collaborative partnership, number one. Work with stakeholders, value inquiry, value unique perspectives for change. Number two, it has to be evidence-based practice. So our initiatives are therefore grounded in robust research and data, ensuring informed decision making and continuous improvement. And I stress that continuous improvement as a learning city is key. Inclusivity. We champion diversity and we create inclusive spaces so voices can be heard. Sustainability. We consider the long-term social, economic and environmental implications to place. And we have a deep local focus whilst ensuring we are connected to our global communities. So these values are the threads we must continue to weave across disciplines, geographies, generations to build a learning society that is resilient, inclusive and alive to possibility. So I would like to ask you and invite you to maybe reflect on what's your dual role as an educator, as a practitioner, as a citizen? How do you advocate for civic spaces for learning that are mobile, adaptable and co-created like the S.H.E.D? And how do you encourage others and yourselves to see that idea of being a weaver of civic threads, connecting people, places and ideas for learning? So as we consider how to weave those urban and rural knowledges into a learning society, we must also reflect on our own role within it. Learning is not confined to a classroom or to a city centre. It happens, as I said, in fields, at festivals, in sheds, over shared conversations and cups of tea. The civic thread is only made stronger when we ask ourselves, what does learning look like in my place? What can I offer and what can I learn from others across different landscapes? A learning society thrives on collaboration, inclusivity and a local global awareness. It's built on the principles of partnership, evidence-based practice and policy, sustainability and a commitment to valuing every voice. So whether we're educators, artists, policymakers or community members, we're all part of this evolving civic fabric. The question now is, how will you help to weave it? So as I close, I invite you to find a moment, whether in a bustling city street or a quiet rural pathway, to pause and reflect on your own threads of knowledge. What experiences, places and people have shaped how you learn, engage and contribute to your community? What might you unlearn and what new threads are waiting to be woven? In this shared civic fabric, each of us holds a strand. So the question is, how will you weave yours into the learning societies that you are a part of so we can build those together? Thank you.